Part 2 of Carpenter and Kennedy provides very specific and detailed steps for the process of resolving a community dispute. Often these will sound like the same processes used in an interpersonal or organizational dispute, but these steps are much more detailed and take into account the many more people involved, the different affinity groups and interest groups that participate, and the complexity of the values being discussed. Process design consists of 3 steps and a multitude of sub-steps under each one. The steps are preparing a plan, conducting the program, and carrying out the agreement. We'll focus on the first step, preparing a plan. The first step in preparing the plan is for a conflict manager to analyze the conflict. This step is very much like the first step in critical thinking. Collect information from a variety of sources, including interviews and documents, and assess that information. Interviews will provide information you may not be able to get from documents. Relationships, how people feel about each other and about the issue, what changes have occurred in the last few months, are all important to understanding what the conflict is about. Just listening to people thoughtfully in an interview can begin the process on a very positive note. For some participants, you may be the first person they think has listened seriously to their needs. Collecting information should take a very broad approach. For example, find out who was involved the last time this issue came up. Who are the key players in the community? Who must be included in the process? How do people in the community feel about this conflict? Are they supportive? Do they question it? Are there old feuds that influence whether or not the information will be rejected, even if it's accurate? Take into account what information is missing as well as what's there, the credibility of the information and its source, and whether or not the information is even applicable to the situation. I use this approach in beginning a project with leadership teams and organizational units. I always interview each person individually, perhaps do a survey, and take a look at what people have written. Emails are a great source of how people really feel. Very often, the obstacles that delayed or even precluded a resolution in the past still influence the current process, and these should be addressed openly and early. However, addressing these obstacles may require a mini-mediation for each one. Putting time into this issue right at the beginning of the process will reduce chances of disruptive surprises later if past issues are raised unexpectedly. Distinguishing between interests and positions in defining the problem may mean that a long list of anxieties, resentments, and desires may come out as part of the history of the conflict. These represent the very strong feelings of the people in the interest groups, so old fights may have to be resolved before the current issue can be addressed effectively. Collecting and analyzing the information takes time and seems very complex and labor-intensive, but it provides the context for the process. The more context and background you have to understand the conflict, the more you know what to expect, and the easier the later stages of the process will be. The second phase of process design is to design a strategy. To design a strategy, though, you have to have a clearly defined problem to solve, one that is acceptable to all parties. It should answer the question how or what, not should we do this or that. Without a clearly defined problem, goals and strategies for reaching them can't be clarified. It is in defining the problem that the concept of reframing becomes important. In the example used by Carpenter and Kennedy, different interest groups may have different ideas for how a plot of land owned by the city should be used. The problem is defined as whether or not to allow a hotel to be built on that land, which is an adversarial statement requiring a yes or no answer. Reframe the topic to a more general or conceptual problem. Should the problem be defined narrowly by the yes or no question being about a hotel, or more conceptually about how best to manage public land so the community can thrive? Maybe a theme park or an open space would be better for the community than the hotel, but the first question does not allow for exploring other options. In another example, do we talk about reducing racial conflict, which might focus on specific behaviors or policies? Or do we talk about how we can expand on the richness of a culturally diverse community? Reframing is vital to finding a way to define the problem so that everyone can agree to work on it and not feel that the so-called real issue is being ignored. The problem also has to be defined as a mutual problem. not a problem of one group or the other, because that sets up an adversarial frame rather than a collaborative frame. Because not all groups will agree that the problem is, say, an economic problem or a cultural problem or a financial problem, the problem has to be stated in a way that is more general and more conceptual, so it can be agreed on by all groups. Another way of thinking about reframing is called finding unifying questions. A unifying question is more conceptual than a question about a specific plan or proposal. The redefinition of the issues mentioned above, from permitting a hotel to the best use of land for the community, is an example of a unifying question. No one specific group's issue is the center of the discussion. A more general problem replaces it and brings everyone together to solve it. These questions can be difficult to frame. An approach that works well is to ask the participants, what important issue can we all agree on? And let the participants begin from a place of agreement rather than disagreement. After defining the problem, the process goal should be identified as well. The goal may actually not be a resolution. Maybe the goal is simply an information exchange or creation of a list of recommendations, or perhaps improved relationships so that the resolution process can be engaged. A full resolution may not be in the immediate future. No matter how you define the problem, the group must be involved in developing its own process and its own guidelines for how to address it. Relationships must be supported and nurtured, and face work must be done throughout the process so that everyone feels respected. Once goals have been established, the process for meetings and discussions should be established by the group itself, with responsibility for supporting that process given to the conflict manager. Considerations might include where and when to meet, whether or not the meetings are open to the press, and establishing committees or task forces. A key issue to be determined is who should participate. Which community leaders must be involved? How many people from each stakeholder group should attend? Does the number of representatives have to be proportionate to the number of members of each group? When thinking about who should participate, try to identify a core group of moderates on each side, or the dispute will polarize and nothing will be accomplished. Appealing to a sense of fair play may help moderate the situation. To make this process effective, several intangibles also have to be addressed. First, values must be acknowledged and taken into account, even if they don't immediately seem to be driving the dispute. Try to identify the role of values and whether progress can be made if they are really strongly held. Values may not be stated openly, but the use of specific words, demonstrated attitudes, as well as the strength of the language will indicate which values are being supported and how strongly. It will also be necessary to prevent one group from trying to impose its values on the other. Resentment will build, conflict will escalate, and no progress can be made. As Carpenter and Kennedy point out, conflicts happen not because the values are different, but because one side demands that the other side give in. Second, a sense of trust must be developed, or a safe environment cannot be created. In mediation, we often talk about trust being dependability over time. Carpenter and Kennedy defined it as the expectation that people will deal honest with each other. People will act as they say they will. 3 elements of trust must be present for the resolution process to be successful: confidence in the convener's integrity and competence, belief in the process, and expectations that the parties will deal honestly with each other. Addressing causes of mistrust, such as past negative experiences, can be part of the discussion, but may bring up old complaints and hard feelings that will have to be addressed. Feeling safe enough to share information, be honest about concerns, and make suggestions for options will demonstrate trust, and the resolution can be built on that feeling. Third, power issues must be addressed. The initial power relationships may be hard to determine. Often groups with no apparent power, financial, political, technical, have more power than they realize because they have intangibles that can change the course of the process. They have ingenuity, obstinacy, moral or legal standing, the power of truth, the power of public shaming. We generally talk about structural power, the power of the position held by that person. Personal power, personality, honesty, integrity, energy. Referent power, access to other people. or coercive power, the ability to cause harm or to reward. Power is also often defined as the ability to get things done. How one uses that power is another consideration entirely. Carpenter and Kennedy claim that the balance of power is not necessary, but the ability to influence others is, and that is what constitutes power. After all the process issues have been addressed, the program can officially begin. Just getting to this stage involves a lot of hard work and considerable negotiation, so it can be considered a significant step toward resolution. Now, a full description of the program and its processes, guidelines for membership, behavior, roles and responsibilities, meeting schedules, and other details should be written out so that everyone works from the same set of initial agreements. The statement of the problem and the goals, as well as the time frame and time commitment, should be clearly stated. It sounds like the work continues to be difficult, time-consuming, and even overly detailed, but it's important for everyone to know what they're getting into right from the start, or they'll drop out because their expectations for resolution and time commitments were incorrect, and it will seem that no progress is being made. The remaining two phases, conducting a program and carrying out agreements in Carpenter and Kennedy, are beyond the scope of this discussion and indeed of this course. But a cursory look at the process can provide some ideas for managing not only the complexities of a community conflict, but of our more common and smaller scaled conflicts as well. Every conflict provides an opportunity to learn something new, to paraphrase Ken Cloke, a wonderful mediator and mentor. So the techniques and approaches we use in one situation, the insights we learn from each conflict, can be adapted for use in another. There are many good ideas in the two texts we've been using, and I hope this information has clarified some of these ideas and connected them to the other material as well. Many thanks today go to Shanley Williams, the recording engineer from the Digital Media Arts program at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and to the lab for allowing us the use of their studios. And thanks very much for listening.